Hi guys, it's so good to have you again in this session of our government tutorials. I'm sure you've had good times with us in our previous videos, and in this lesson we shall be considering the military in the Nigerian politics. And at the time we are done with this lesson, you should be able to evaluate the reasons given for military interventions. At all the times that there has been military infiltrations, what were the reasons? And again, you should assess the achievements of military rule, if there has been any. And again, you should determine the conditions that necessitate the withdrawal from governance actually. And you know that the military have their functions specified, and that is for the defense of the nation. They are supposed to protect and defend the country where there is an attack externally or in the country. But we find out that over the years, the military have sort of moved from their duty posts to administration. And there were so many factors that led to these infiltrations by the military, and that's what we are here to consider. And the first thing is tribal loyalty. And so during the times, we understand that people were more loyal and paid more obeisance to their tribes, to the areas where they are from, rather than the center. And so when the central government is no longer respected as the center, then the military of course takes over. Another factor is regional differences, and just like the tribal differences, the people are also more inclined to the regions where they are from. And that's another factor that brings the military into power. Another factor is religion and regional or state-based political parties. Now, you agree with me when we talked about the political parties of all the republics that ever existed, that the political parties were not nationally carved. They were more of the regions that we have. Like the NPC was for the north, the NCNC was for the east and the west. And so we did not have an exact political party that had a national outlook. And so that was a factor that also pushed the military to take over power. Another point you want to consider is political dispute over the census results. And so the first two censuses that were carried out in Nigeria at the time had so many errors. People complained about the inflation of the numbers or inflation of the results. And you know that the census, the figures of the census are required for administration of the country. And so the limitation of constituencies or for allocation of revenue, those are factors that are engendered by the census results. And so where it is infiltrated or where it has been marginalized, you find out that some people get more revenue and more resources than the other side. And that's another factor. Now again, generalization of the army. The people who were recruited into the army were no longer based on merit. We had issues where the people would nominate or recruit people into the army based on interest or based on familiarity. And so the issues of merit were no longer considered. And we had a lot of crises at the time. As at 1964, we had a lot of election crises. Political parties were at loggerheads as to who would represent who. And so many of those crises brought about so much unrest in the country. And so the military had to intervene. If you also look at the action group crisis, where two political parties were also fighting and they were at loggerheads about who would be the president at the time. The military just had to come in because the country already had declared a state of emergency that lasted for over 6 months. And so the military just had to come in and take over governance. And we also had the Western Nigeria election crisis, so many election crises of the various regions that were. And of course, as it has always been, allegations of corruption, nepotism, sectionalism, familiarity and all of that were factors that really necessitated the military to come in and take over. But then, were they even the best? We shall see that. And we also had issues of low level of economic development. And so the money and the finances that were should be put into development and infrastructural development of areas were siphoned by the people in the political corridors. So they used the money for their own personal projects, neglecting the very reason those funds were released in the first place. And we had absence of honest and reliable leadership. Our leaders were not trustworthy at the time. We couldn't trust them, and they were not reliable, especially with the funds, and of course mismanagement of public funds. So let's look now at the structure of the military regime. How was it structured? So the first up there is the Armed Forces Ruling Council. That's like the topmost, where you have all of the heads of the military right there. Then we have the Council of Ministers, and you would know that the Armed Forces Ruling Council functioned as the legislature of the military. And so the Council of Ministers that comprised of head of state or government, the IGP, the Attorney General, and all of those people who were members of Council of Ministers, they functioned as the executive. Now we also had the National Council of State, the judiciary, and the civil service, and of course the Secretary of Government was the head of the civil service at the time. So what impact did the military have on us in their regimes? First was infrastructural development. We find out that a lot of roads were constructed in their regimes. So much infrastructure, railways, airports were built at that time. And also breaking into units, they helped to put the country into the various segments that there are. And they also introduced and initiated various programs that built and improved the economy of the country, like the program of Operation Feed the Nation at the time, where food became a problem in the country. They initiated the Operation Feed the Nation and so many other programs that improved the Nigerian economy. They also created the states. And you remember when we talked about state creation, the first republic, where the first 12 states were created, it was a military administration. Even the next one by Murtala Mohammed, the 19 states that were created, it was a military administration. And also they encouraged regional cooperation. They were not about tearing the country apart, but encouraged regional cooperation. And the Nigerian foreign policy at that time, of course we shall discuss Nigerian foreign policy up next, but then at the time their foreign policies helped and led the struggle against apartheid and colonialism of other African nations. And of course the local government reforms, you remember that there was the indirect rule system before the time they came, and so they also helped to bring about a one-tier local government system. And new constitutions were made by them, like the 1979 constitution. They also promoted national integration. They had a lot of programs that improved and brought about national integration. For instance, the National Youth Service Corps that we all know was introduced by the military, and it was a way to integrate the people. And so you're done with your university education, they send you to somewhere where you've not been to, so you be a part of that locality and also improve the people, the lives of the people in that place. They had mass-oriented programs. It was in that time that the new Federal Capital Territory was established. It was moved from Lagos to Abuja, and that was also in the administration of Murtala Mohammed. And again, in that same administration, the change in the pattern of driving, where it has moved from the right-hand side to the left-hand side, was also in the military administration. And this administration brought about a radical change and improvement in the educational system. Now that's so much about the military, so much goodness in there. But then they had weaknesses that we are not sure if it really is a good government to adopt. And some of them are these. One is incompetence or inexperience. You would agree with me that the military, they do not have political knowledge. All they are about is military, and so they do not have administrative training. And for them to be in power is not very comfortable and not very good administratively. And of course, they had zero tolerance to criticism. They were never open to public opinions and criticisms, and that is not good for any government. For any government to be a good one, remember when we talked about legitimacy, they must be open to constructive criticisms, and of course the military never accommodated that. And again, dictatorship. Every military government is dictatorship in nature. That's the way they are, and we can't change that. And of course, the independence of the judiciary could never have been guaranteed under the military. Well, they also caused the Nigerian Civil War from 1967 to 1970. It was the flaws in the government that brought about the Nigerian Civil War, and millions of lives were lost. And again, this administration and regimes were laden with corruption. So many of them were accused of being corrupt and helped in the crimes of the society. And of course, they mismanaged and wasted public funds. There was a lot of importations at the time. They had to import everything, rice, cement, everything from outside the country, and so much funds were wasted. And of course, this administration is the best fit for violation of human rights. They never paid attention to the rights of the human persons, and so it was not just a very comfortable administration. And of course, there was increase in crime rate of the country at the time. And this administration is very undemocratic. There is no respect for law, there is no rule of law, and they ruled by decrees. That is not supposed to be. And they failed to conduct reliable and acceptable census. So many problems laden in this administration. That's so much about the military regime. Up next, we shall be looking at the foreign policies of Nigeria. Do watch out for the video. Thank you.